My topic is, how far can a language take you? And perhaps what I really should have said is, where can a language take you? And the answer to that question is that a language can take you deep inside yourself and out into the world, into places you never imagined. A language can take you into the past and also into the future. Now, I am a Midwesterner, like a lot of you here. And you see on the map there, the pin is dropped on my hometown of Midland, Michigan. And when I was growing up, like I guess a lot of Americans, I perceived the world as monolingual. I really only heard English spoken around me. In looking back, I imagine I probably had classmates who spoke Japanese at home, or Hindi, Polish, French, but they never spoke it in front of me. And therefore, I really sort of felt that foreign languages were a bit of a fiction. I had a vague notion that my family was somehow German. And when I was learning music, like the piece I've put up here, this is from Anna Magdalena's notebook, and it's Bist du bei mir, geh ich mit Freuden. I won't continue, lots of people sing that better than I do, but I was instructed to ask my grandmother about the pronunciation. And lo and behold, Grandma spoke some German. Now later on, I would figure out that Grandma spoke really bad German because she hadn't spoken it in about 50 years. But this was sort of one of my first inklings that there were languages out there. The history of language fascinated me. Hieroglyphics, how did those work? I bought books about it, but I didn't really get very far because I was self-taught. Latin, I understood that Latin was a root language for English. I bought books about Latin, but I couldn't teach myself. Really, really wanted to take it in high school. Our school didn't offer it. And so I took French, really primarily because my mother still had her French dictionary from when she was in high school. It was a different time, okay? We didn't have the online dictionaries, but this physical book we owned, therefore I didn't have to buy a new one, and so I took French. It was really that simple. It was the closest I could get to Latin. In praise of the US public school system, 5 years of high school French got me far enough that when I hit college, I was able to go into a French literature class and read Rousseau and Racine and even Corneille and Nerval, and I actually learned French. And then I decided I was going to be a singer, which meant that now I had to learn German and Italian at a minimum, right? There are many other languages that you can sing in, but those are the three big ones for opera. And this is when I discovered starting German as a freshman in college. Now, take note of that. I was 18 years old when I started German. And I try to tell this to all of my classes that are starting in college. Yes, you can start a language in college and get far enough that you could actually teach that language. And here's what I discovered for myself. Language, learning a language, rewires your brain. It does that already from the second language, but I noticed it with my third language because I sat in my freshman German class, and every time I couldn't think of a word in German, out popped French. It was as though my native language and my foreign languages were stored in like completely different areas of my brain. Well, the MRI that you have up here shows some of the areas of the brain that light up for bilinguals, for people who are speaking multiple languages. This is far too complex for me to even understand, let alone explain to you, but I will mention one scholar who works on bilingualism, that is Stephen Krashen. He's a big advocate for bilingual education. Lots and lots of scientific research done on this, including the fact that being bilingual or knowing a foreign language can actually preserve your brain from aging. And as I near the end of my career, I'm putting a lot of hope in that. So eventually, in my 40 years ago, okay, yes, I'm old, 40 years ago, I headed off to Germany for the first time to study abroad. And I've got a map up here which shows Munich, where I went. And then I think I dropped a little dot in my family's original hometown in Germany. Tiny little place called Oberheinried. There's nothing there, a couple of, pig farms and things. This happens to be the region in Baden-Württemberg where a certain Drumpf family originated. I don't know if you'll recognize that. That was the German name of the Trump family. Okay, not related, but similar origin. Many, many people immigrated from this area. The top image here shows an older couple who I knew as Onkel Albert and Tante Margot. You see, even as a child, I actually was speaking some German, but I didn't know it. I had a great aunt who I called Tante Dori. I just thought that was her name, Tante Dori, one word. No, Tante, German for aunt, Dori, my grandmother's sister. This older couple, they didn't have kids. And every Christmas, every birthday, they gave me something with a little red polka dot mushroom on it. It's actually the fly amanita mushroom. I had no idea why, but I looked forward to it. One year they gave me like a piggy bank, a ceramic piggy bank in the form of this mushroom. And okay, that was just a weird thing that these relatives did. Well, when I went to Germany, I realized that this is a very common symbol of good luck among Germans. And so I had in my own family here an instance where, although I never spoke German with this couple, just the name, the culture had persisted despite switching the language. The other thing that happened when I went to Germany is that my grandmother gave me a list of names and addresses of German relatives who I didn't even know existed, let alone that she had been writing letters to them for decades. And that's the family that you see in the bottom image. The older couple, the gentleman was my grandfather's cousin. You see, if I hadn't gone to Germany, all of this would have just been erased from my knowledge of my family history. The wonderful thing about actually having German relatives is that they took me in. Partly they did this out of gratitude to my grandmother, who apparently, after the Second World War, had sent care packages and kept them alive. At least this is how they told it to me. And so I spent every holiday with his family. I saw how real Germans lived. I was invited to a wedding. Later on, I think this picture is actually from my German couple's 50th wedding anniversary. And my point here is not that there's anything genetic about language learning. There isn't. A person of any racial, ethnic background, any color, can learn German, Chinese, Swahili, take your pick. There is a little bit of an influence from where you grew up, right? The sounds that you hear as a child influence what sounds you're able to make easily later on. But that's not genetics, it's culture, okay? So this was a marvelous, marvelous gift, and certainly helped German stick for me and helped me understand the part of language that you can't get from textbooks, which is how do people actually behave, what's important to them. When they say the words that they say, see, this is something I try to explain to my students. They'll ask me, how do you say X in German? And I'll look at them and I'll say, you don't. The Germans don't have that saying. The Germans have this other saying, and many, many sayings that we don't have. So learning a language, it isn't as simple as, let me take my native words and find new words for them. It is a whole new way of being in the world and understanding your existence. Well, you might think that this gets me to the meat of my presentation, which is now to talk about my career as a German professor. And that has indeed been the meat of my life for the past 35 years. Of course, I went and got a PhD in my 20s, spent every minute that I possibly could in Germany in order to really solidify that language. And at this point, it really is a second language. We could debate as to whether I'm truly bilingual. What does that even mean? There are degrees of bilingualism, but it's definitely been a wonderful ride for me. And the images that you see here on the left is the very first study abroad group that I took from Bowling Green to our program in Salzburg. This picture is in Weimar. Of course, since the wall came down, in Germany. You heard about that, right? There was this Cold War, it ended. And so we have actually been able to visit cities in the former East Germany. Weimar is one of those. So that image is from Weimar. The middle image is in Berlin. That's me with Marx and Engels. East Germany became one of my research specialties. And on the right is another one of my many groups that I've taken to Austria, and this particular one is in Salzburg. So I've spent a total of 5 years in Austria and a number of years in Germany. But here's what I really want to talk about. A different language. When 2001 happened, 9/11, I had just been put in charge of international studies on campus. And I looked around campus and I asked myself, what classes and professors do we have on campus that can help us to understand this event? You know, not to justify it, of course, but to understand why there were people willing to commit suicide flying a plane into the Twin Towers. Who do we have that teaches Arabic? We do have a few Arabic classes. Who teaches about Islam? Really nobody. Who teaches about the Middle East? There have been occasionally a person here or there, often in political science or in history, but our campus has not really made a commitment to this. And so with a number of other colleagues, we just decided, well, we have to do it. And one of the first things that we did was we brought the picture that you'll see here. This is taken in Tunisia. And the man in the picture is Hamadi Rudisi. I heard him on the radio, again, just recently. He is a scholar of Islam. He is also a member of the Tunisian opposition. So he has been in and out of jail. He's been involved since the, you know, if we hadn't brought him to campus, I wouldn't have this window onto what happened in the Arab Spring. And so a funny thing happened when I went to Tunisia and later to Egypt. I started realizing that this language that you see up here, I've written in Arabic, Al-Lughat al-Arabiyya, which just means the Arab language in Arabic, that it's actually intelligible. I used to look at this language and think, oh, that's a bunch of scribbles. I could never, you know, where does one letter end and the other begins? And then somebody taught me how to write my name in Arabic. And my name in Arabic, my first name is just K-R-S-T. They don't write the vowels. I asked somebody, so how do you know that that's Kristie and not crust or some other word? And they looked at me like I was an idiot and said, well, you just know. Because of course you've learned to speak the language before you learn to write it. And therefore when you see a combination of letters, the next one, that is the word Muhammad. Well, that's really the meaning in Arabic is always carried by 3 letters. And in this case, it's Ha, Mim, Dal. So H, M, and D. Those 3 letters together really always signal the word Muhammad. Another word that you maybe have seen, the next word here, al-jihad. Again, 3 letters, J-H-D. Jihad, I should be really careful to say, really refers to an inward spiritual struggle, okay? And when the Prophet Muhammad returned from the war between Mecca and Medina, he said, I am returning from the lesser jihad, right, the war, to the greater jihad, which is controlling yourself. So I think a lot of Americans, they hear jihad and they think, oh, those warlike Arabs. Not what it's about. Same word, same letters, the word on the bottom, mujahideen. The meaning is carried by the J, H, and the D. When I started to understand this, Arabic began to make sense to me and I wanted to learn it. And lo and behold, I took my first Arabic class in Austria. The book was in German. By this point, German's really my second language. And so I'm learning Arabic from a German book, and I'm not actually translating back to English in my mind. I'm just reading the info in German and learning Arabic from that. It was the coolest experience. The other really cool thing about that class was that although there were me and 2 other older people with more academic interest, most of the class was young Austrians who had some sort of Arab or Muslim ancestry. And so the person out in the hall would be David Schmidt, und der hat gesprochen wie ein richtiger Österreicher. Okay, so this was in Austrian as far as I know. And then we would get into class, and suddenly David would transform into Daoud. Well, this is what language does. It makes you a new person. It gives you a new worldview. And I think that as I move towards sort of the end of my career and retirement, I'm not going to let go of languages and of learning new languages. There's so many beautiful ones, right? Sanskrit, the way it's written, is so beautiful. And I realize now what I didn't realize when I was 18. I can't actually learn them all. About a dozen seems to be the limit. For, there are some people who truly do speak a dozen languages and speak them fluently. I'm not one of those, but I'm hoping for maybe half a dozen because it's just so much fun, right? And of course, I've spent now a lot of time in Egypt thanks to this language. I did get to go to the land of the hieroglyphs, and I saw a lot of very cool ancient stuff, but what fascinates me is how the people in Egypt live now. You've got an image there of a truck with a cow just riding in the back of the truck. Okay, there's a common sight. But it's so cool how they paint their trucks. This is something I've realized happens not just in the Middle East, but all through Central Asia. In the central image, there's me with just a bunch of children. They're so different. The people in Egypt, they're Arab, they're Phoenician, they're Nubian, they're many, many different things. And they've got their own culture and their own form of Arabic. And of course, there I am with a bunch of bananas. Now I know how bananas grow. That was cool. But the question that I want to end with, so I've told you a little bit about where languages have taken me, physically, professionally, intellectually, in terms of discovering who I am. But the question I want to leave you with is, where can a language take you? Any language, the language that you want to learn. Maybe the language of your ancestors, maybe a language that, like Arabic for me, really has nothing to do with your background and experience. Maybe, like one of my students, Helen, who studied in Germany, studied in England, ended up interning with Madeleine Albright. That's the image that we see here. She is now an international patent lawyer. So there's what language did for her. Played a role in her development. Maybe you're like this guy, Alex Meixner, not an actual German. This guy's an American with, like me, some German background, but he plays polka. He keeps that music alive, and he sings it in German, which I really appreciate. Maybe we'll have him to campus again. Maybe, like my student Ryan, a student here from BGSU, he is now a professor of piano. That's really what he does. He's a pianist. But he studied in Austria. And because of his language skill, he is back in Europe every summer working as an accompanist in a summer program in Austria. Or maybe you might be like Phil in this picture, another student of mine, a Bowling Green native who took German in high school. Well, once you know German and English, Dutch isn't that much of a stretch. And so Phil just picked up and moved to Amsterdam and lives and works there. This is just a few. I could have a whole other lecture on what have my students done, but this is just a little bit of a window on where can a language take you. And my parting words for you are, let the journey begin.